What if I told you the 10 changes that doubled my deer sightings in a single season had nothing to do with buying better gear? 3 years ago, I started keeping a notebook. Not a journal, just a pocket-sized spiral where I wrote down everything I did on every site. Wind direction, entry route, time in and time out, what I saw, what I did wrong. After 2 full seasons and over 200 entries, a pattern jumped off the page so clearly I almost didn't believe it. The sits where I saw mature bucks had almost nothing in common with what I thought mattered. The expensive camo didn't matter. The calls didn't matter. What mattered in almost every single entry where I wrote down a shooter's sighting was a short list of quiet decisions I made before I ever climbed the tree. 10 of them. And every one was something a beginner does one way and a pro does the opposite. I'm going to walk through all 10. And I'll tell you now, at least 3 of these are going to sting a little because you're probably doing them right now. Number 1. The beginner spends $300 on scent elimination spray and hunts any stand he wants. The pro checks the wind and stays home if it's wrong. This is the mistake that costs more deer than all the others combined. A guy comes back to hunting after 10 or 15 years away, walks into a gear store, and leaves with scent-free soap, scent-free detergent, activated carbon clothing, an ozone generator, and a full-body spray-down kit. He runs the whole ritual before every hunt. Then he walks to whichever stand he feels like sitting because he checked the forecast at breakfast and figured west wind meant his south-facing stand was fine. He trusts the spray like a force field. Here's the biology. A whitetail has 297 million olfactory receptors. You have 5 million. Hair and the bacteria living on all of hair and the bacteria living on all of it. Mississippi State University tested the best scent sprays on the market and found they reduce about 29 of those compounds. That leaves over 1,700 that a deer can still smell from a quarter-mile away on a humid morning with a light breeze. What the experienced hunter does is treat wind as a binary. If the wind is wrong for a stand, he doesn't hunt it. Full stop. No product overrides that rule. An outfitter I know in Warren County, Iowa, that's the stretch of rolling ag land south of Indianola where the timber fingers follow the creek bottoms, maintains 22 gun stands for 8 hunters. He rotates clients by wind direction alone. Every stand has 1 or 2 acceptable winds. And if conditions shift mid-morning, he'll drive out and move a client rather than let him sit on a bad wind. Products are a supplement, not a strategy. Trick 2. The beginner hunts his favorite stand every outing. The pro saves his best spot and hunts it 3 times all season. You found the tree where your buddy killed a 10.3 years ago, or where you saw a shooter cross at 30 yards during the second week of November. Now you hunt it every time you go out. Saturday morning, Tuesday evening, the day after Thanksgiving. You've been there 11 times this season, and the deer sightings dropped from regular to almost nothing by week 4, but you stay loyal because this is your spot. GPS collar data from Mississippi State tells the story. On hunted properties, daylight buck visits to food sources dropped from 1 in 3 during the first 3 weeks of season to 1 in 20 by week 13. The bucks didn't leave. They shifted their movement to avoid the accumulated human scent at your stand and along your walking trail. Your scent persists on vegetation and soil for roughly 10 to 15 days after a single visit. Hunt that stand twice a week and the scent never fades. The area becomes a permanent no-go zone for any buck that's survived past age 3. The experienced hunter maintains a network of 8 to 12 stands and tiers them. His best locations, the ones closest to bedding or on the tightest funnels, get hunted once or twice the entire season, only when wind and conditions are perfect. Everything else is a rotation based on what the day gives him. A guy on a Tennessee hunting forum tracked his mature buck sightings across 6,000 hours over 30 years, and found that encounter rates dropped sharply after the 3rd sight in any single location per season. 3 sits, that's the number. Number 3. The beginner walks the shortest path to his tree. The pro plans his route like a heist. Here's the scene. It's 5:15 a.m., and you're crossing the bean field in the dark with your headlamp bouncing because it saves 10 minutes. You follow the deer trail to your stand because it's already cleared and easy to walk. You don't think about where deer are feeding at 5:15 or where they'll be bedding at 3:30 in the afternoon. Your entry strategy is get there, your exit strategy is get home. The experienced hunter considers access route planning more important than stand placement. The rule is simple and non-negotiable. Never walk where the deer walk. Use creek beds, field edges behind berms, established hiking paths that deer already associate with human presence and avoid. One veteran public land hunter on a forum told the story of a 160 class buck that approached his stand on a primary trail, hit the boot scent where the hunter had walked in, and immediately turned and vanished. That buck had been patterned for 2 seasons, gone because of a walk-in route. Biologically, it's the same scent persistence from trick 2. Every step you take deposits compounds that linger for over a week. If your walking path crosses the deer's travel corridor, you've contaminated the very funnel you're trying to hunt. Walk through a feeding area before dawn, and every deer that was there in the dark knows a human came through. They file that information and adjust. Trick 4. The beginner leaves at 10 because nothing's moving. The pro sits through lunch and kills his best buck at 11:30. It's the first week of November. You've been on stand since 5:30. Saw 2 does at first light, nothing since. Your back hurts, your thermos is empty, and there's a game on at noon. You climb down, walk out, maybe come back at 3. It feels rational. Nothing was happening, except everything was about to happen. GPS data from the Deer Lab at Mississippi State shows that during the rut, mature bucks travel roughly 6,000 yards per day, a 50% increase over their October baseline. The Caesar Kleberg Wildlife Research Institute at Texas A&M found that during peak rut, 60% of GPS-collared bucks return to doe focal areas every 24 to 28 hours, checking for receptive does. Those circuits run all day. Between 10 and 2 is when bucks cruise between doe bedding groups, and that's exactly when most hunters are back at camp eating a sandwich. A Louisiana guide told a story that still haunts him. One of the biggest bucks he'd ever seen stepped out of a thicket 30 yards from his stand, broadside, looking away. He wasn't in the stand. He was leaning against the base of the tree looking at his phone because he'd climbed down 10 minutes earlier to catch a football game. Another 10 minutes of patience and he would have had the deer of his life. Number 5. The beginner grunts every 10 minutes like a metronome. The pro might not touch his call all day. You bought a grunt tube after watching a hunting show where a 170-inch buck charged into aggressive rattling. Now, you grunt on a schedule. Every 10 or 15 minutes, same volume, same cadence, blowing your Primo's hardwood grunter like a foghorn, regardless of time of season. When a buck finally approaches on its own, you grunt at it to bring it closer. It circles downwind, catches your scent at 40 yards, and you never see it again. The experienced hunter treats calls the way a surgeon treats a scalpel. Early season gets soft, contact grunts space 30 to 45 minutes apart at most. Pre-rut gets moderate grunts with light rattling. Peak rut is the only window for aggressive sequences, and only in areas with confirmed buck competition. Post-rut goes nearly silent. The most important rule is the one beginners violate constantly. If a deer is already coming toward you, stop calling and get your weapon ready. A buck's first response to a grunt is to circle downwind and scent check whatever made the noise. If he's already on a path that brings him through your shooting lane, calling only gives him a reason to change that path. One forum veteran estimated that for every buck you call in, you educate 20 that hear the same sounds and associate them with human presence. Trick 6. The beginner checks his trail cameras every 4 days. The pro checks his every 4 weeks. 6 cameras, all on primary trails, one of them 30 yards from a bedding area. You check them every long weekend, walking deep into deer habitat, standing at each camera for 10 minutes reviewing photos on the screen. You've got an impressive album of nighttime buck photos and a growing mystery about why you never see those deer during daylight. The mystery isn't a mystery. You've turned your camera route into the most consistent source of human scent intrusion on your property. An outfitter who manages hundreds of cameras across a large operation in western Illinois recommends checking once every 3 to 4 weeks during the hunting season. The placement rule from experienced camera users is simple. Cameras go on edges, field edges, logging road intersections, cover-type transitions, places you can access without walking through deer habitat. Cell cameras reduce intrusion for sensitive spots, but placement still matters more than technology. And the biggest trap is psychological. Beginners won't hunt a spot. unless cameras confirm a shooter is present. Cameras become an excuse not to hunt, rather than a tool to hunt smarter. If you're getting value from this, subscribe. There's more of these coming. Number 7. The beginner spent $1,500 at the gear store and 0 hours at the range. The pro spent $200 on a good release and shot 3,000 arrows. Two versions of this, and they often overlap. Version 1 is the gear collector who walks into a store with an open wallet and delays hunting until he feels fully equipped. Version 2 is the range skipper who sights in once from a bench rest the week before opener and calls it good. He's never drawn his bow wearing his bulky hunting jacket. He's never shot from 20 feet up. He's never squeezed a trigger with cold, stiff fingers. The experienced hunter invests in practice over product. An outfitter in Bowie County, Texas, that's the northeast corner of the state, where the piney woods meet the Red River bottomland, makes every rifle client shoot upon arrival at camp before entering the field. He's seen too many misses from hunters whose equipment was fine, but whose skills had rusted since last November. The best bow hunters I know practice from raised platforms in full gear, year-round, and they deliberately spike their heart rate before releasing, running in place for a minute, then drawing and shooting, because that's what a real shot feels like. The adrenaline is the variable, not the bow. A guy on a hunting forum who's been at it for 43 years boiled it down to 7 words. Pick a spot of hair and kill it. University of Georgia. Deer research shows whitetails have 20/100 visual acuity, which is poor for detail, but they process motion 2.5 to 4 times faster than humans. They detect movement, not patterns. A $30 leafy suit breaks up your outline as effectively as a $300 jacket from the pro shop. What deer do detect is the arrow that flies 3 inches high, because you never accounted for a steep downward angle from your Matthews 3 at 22 feet, or the shot that sails over a buck's back because your Vortex Diamondback HD was zeroed from a bench, but you never practiced offhand in the cold. Trick 8. The beginner hunts the food plot every morning, the pro hunts the food plot in the evening, and the funnel at dawn. You've got a nice stand on the edge of a bean field. You hunt it mornings and evenings, walking out in the dark across open ground. Morning hunts produce almost nothing, maybe a distant doe at first light, then silence. What you don't realize is that deer were feeding in that field until 20 minutes before you arrived. Your headlamp, your walk-in scent, your presence in the pre-dawn dark blew out every animal that was there. Auburn University put GPS collars on deer and published the finding that should have changed how every hunter in America thinks about food sources. Both sexes selected food plots over all other cover types at night, then strongly selected away from food plots throughout most legal hunting hours. Food plots represented only 6% of the study landscape, but 23% of the area hunters watched from stands. The mismatch is enormous. The correction is directional. Food source stands are evening setups, period. Morning stands belong on transition corridors and funnels between feeding and bedding, the travel routes deer use as they filter back to cover after a night of eating. You hunt the route at dawn and the destination at dusk. Getting this backwards is one of the most common reasons a guy says he hunts hard and never sees anything. Number 9. The beginner scouts aggressively in September. The pro scouted in February and hasn't touched the woods since July. Labor Day weekend hits, and you're in the woods every Saturday and Sunday, hanging stands, clearing lanes, checking rubs, moving cameras, walking ridges. You're putting in 15 hours of boots-on-ground scouting 3 to 4 weeks before opener. It feels like preparation. What it actually does is show every mature buck in the area exactly where the pressure is coming from. The experienced hunter does the heavy work in the off-season. Post-season scouting in February and March is the standard. Shed antlers reveal which bucks survived. Old rubs and scrapes map travel patterns. Beds are visible without leaves. Stands and cameras get set by July at the latest, giving deer 8 to 10 weeks to settle before season. The final 2 to 3 weeks before opener stay out entirely. GPS collar studies show that some mature bucks abandon a disturbed bedding area for nearly 2 weeks after a single daytime encounter with a human. You can undo a month of careful planning with one September afternoon of hanging tree stands in the wrong spot at the wrong time. What changed this for a lot of hunters is digital scouting. HuntStand and similar mapping apps let you identify funnels, saddles, creek crossings, and transitions from your couch using aerial imagery and topo layers. You confirm with one surgical visit instead of 10 recreational ones. The best scouting you can do in September is no scouting at all. Trick 10. The beginner shoots the moment the buck appears. The pro waits for the right angle and picks a spot of hair behind the shoulder. A buck steps out at 35 yards. Your heart slams. Your hands shake. You're staring at the antlers, not the vitals. You shoot the instant you have a sight picture, quartering toward, brush in the way, front leg back. The arrow hits forward into the shoulder plate or skips high because you never practice steep downward angles. You climb down immediately and start tracking on pure adrenaline, pushing a poorly hit deer through the timber where you'll never recover it. Even the best in the world deal with this. One of the top competitive archers on the planet admitted that on a hunt in Illinois, he physically could not draw his bow back because the adrenaline from seeing a giant buck overwhelmed his motor function. Buck fever is not a beginner problem. It's a human problem. The difference is that the experienced hunter has a practiced routine that overrides it. The correction is a checklist performed so many times it becomes automatic. Is the deer broadside or quartering away? Is the front leg forward, opening the vital window? Is there a clear path to the target? Am I steady? Pick a tuft of hair, not the whole deer, and execute the shot on that spot. After the shot, wait a minimum of 30 minutes for a clean hit. If you suspect a gut shot, wait 4 to 8 hours. Mark the spot with a compass bearing. Note the deer's reaction because that tells you everything. A mule kick usually means a solid double lung hit. A hunch and slow trot means gut shot. Back out and wait. A sprint with tail clamped down could be a miss or a muscle hit. Every yard past 30 for a bow compounds the probability of a bad outcome. An outfitter in Allegheny County, Maryland, that's the narrow western panhandle where Appalachian ridges squeeze deer into tight valleys, told me his 2 most painful guided misses were both inside 100 yards with a rifle. One was broadside. Neither hunter had practiced under pressure. Both had spent heavily on equipment. One limitation applies to small properties. If you're hunting less than 40 acres and you don't control the surrounding land, stand rotation becomes difficult, and access route options shrink to almost nothing. You might only have 2 viable stand locations and 1 way in. On small parcels, the rules still apply, but the margin for error is tighter, and you have to compensate by hunting less often and being more selective about which days you enter the woods. A bad wind day on a 40-acre parcel isn't a rotation day. It's a stay-home day. Think about that number from my notebook for a second. 200 sits over 2 seasons. The sits where I saw mature bucks shared almost none of the variables I used to think mattered. The gear I wore, the calls I used, the money I spent at the pro shop. What they shared was the boring stuff. Correct wind, clean entry route, patience through the midday lull, disciplined silence, a camera check schedule measured in weeks, not days, a stand I hadn't burned out. And when the moment came, a practice shot on a spot of hair instead of a panicked release at a set of antlers. The difference between a beginner and a pro isn't what the pro does, it's what he doesn't do. He doesn't hunt a good stand on a bad wind. He doesn't call it a deer that's already coming. He doesn't walk through a feeding area in the dark. He doesn't check cameras on a whim. He doesn't scout in September. He doesn't shoot at a bad angle. He doesn't climb down at 10 o'clock. The restraint is the skill. Everything you need to double your sightings this season is probably something you need to stop doing, not something you need to start buying. You already know more than you think. Now trust it.